So, my name is Randy Rose. I work at CIS, the Center for Internet Security. I've been there about 5 years, a little over 5 years. You might be familiar with CIS as an organization known for our controls and benchmarks. A lot of people don't realize that CIS also has a full operational component. So we provide operational cybersecurity services to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments through an organization called the MSISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That's what I do there. So I'm the VP of Security Operations. I oversee our Security Operations Center, our Cyber Incident Response Team, CTI team, which is our Cyber Threat Intelligence Team, which is actually where I started in the organization and was my academic background and professional background is in intelligence. We also have a red team, and until recently we had a liaison team. Can you guys hear me in the back all right? All right. I'm pretty loud, generally speaking, so all right, thank you. What I wanted to talk about today, I looked at the agenda when we had the organizers, John and the other organizers from CornCon reach out about having us present. I looked at the agenda and I said, man, there's so many great technical topics. I don't know that there's a really good spot for me to slide in. And so I thought about, well, what can we do that's a little bit different? So I've been working on this kind of topic for a long time. As I mentioned, I have a background in mostly on the Intel side. Even though I did start on the IT admin side, but historically in cyber, I've focused mostly on Intel. And a lot of Intel is really understanding the human. And so I really thought about that. When I looked at the agenda, I said, that's kind of missing a little bit here, really thinking about the human side of cyber and how we interact. And I thought the theme of, I don't know if anybody realized this, but the theme of CornCon is, I think, manifest your inner superhero, something like that, right? Yeah, manifest your inner superhero. So I went with a supervillain theme. I'm a rocker at heart, so it was hard for me to jump on the superhero bandwagon. But I went with the supervillain theme, so it's super cheesy, a bit corny, if you will, but hopefully you guys dig it. So I wanted to start with a quote from a former colleague and I guess associate of mine, a guy named Dr. Peter Vishton. He's a professor of psychology at the College of William & Mary in Virginia. He had this great quote where he says, the human mind remains one of the most mysterious and fascinating frontiers of modern science. Exploring that frontier yields useful knowledge as well as insights about ourselves. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is what are attackers leveraging about ourselves that give them an advantage, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. I did have a video clip in here. I don't think I'm actually connected to the internet since we're pulling this off my computer. So it was a super short clip of the Milgram experiment, but I will explain it in the next slide anyway. In fact, actually, I'll move this. I like to walk around, so hopefully that's okay. So basically what Stanley Milgram did, he did something that was called the obedience experiment. He was really, really fascinated with Nazi Germany. He grew up kind of the tail end of World War II, and he was fascinated with Nazi Germany and the fact, as the Nuremberg trials were being held, he was like, how could people do these atrocious acts? And he was hearing these defenses that many people were saying, well, I was just following orders, and he didn't buy it. He said, there's no way, right? There's no way people were just doing horrible, unethical things just because they were following orders. So he set up experiments, and this is really in the 50s when, from an ethics perspective, science and psychology, the rules were a lot looser than they are now. He would not get away with doing this kind of experiment today, but essentially what he did was he took, and he ran this, I think he ran out of Yale. He was definitely in New England. I think he was in Connecticut. And he ran the experiment where he brought people in, he set them up in a scenario where he created a learner and a teacher. And every person that he was studying, he actually put in the teacher role. And the learner was a paid actor, an actor as part of this experiment, as was the person in the white lab coat who was directing the experiment. That was also an actor. And basically what he did was he set up this box where he did these memory tests. He would ask, or these cognitive tests where he would have the teacher say a series of words, and the learner would respond, and if the learner got them wrong, they got a shock. And there was this really big box with a whole bunch of switches in front of them, and they went from a very mild shock to a very dangerous shock, where all the way on the right-hand side, it literally said danger, XXX, and they had 60%, actually 65% of participants went all the way to that XXX section, even when they knew that they believed that they were causing harm to the learner in the scenario. Why did they do that? They did it because a person with a clipboard and a white lab coat told them that the experiment must continue. When they interviewed people afterwards, they found that, interestingly, a lot of people said, something isn't right. I'm hearing screaming coming through these speakers. The learner's in the next room over. I'm not hearing it through the wall. Stuff was tingling. Their spidey sense was going off, right? They were going, something isn't right here. Something isn't right here. Yet they continued with the experiment anyway because someone told them to. They said, it's important that you do. It's important for science that you continue with the experiment. The experiment requires you to continue. And people did, even when they believed they were hurting somebody. By the way, if you ever watch the video, you can find the Milgram experiment videos on YouTube. You can watch, they filmed parts of it. The acting is terrible, right? You hear this guy yelling from the other room. He's like, ow, stop, you're hurting me. I mean, it's terrible acting. But people in that scenario really believed that they were hurting somebody on the other side of the room. So on the one hand, it's very funny and amusing to watch. On the other hand, it's quite frightening to think about what we're capable of just because someone tells us to do it. There's another guy, Robert Cialdini, who's actually still teaching today. I think he's based out of the University of Arizona. He has a couple great books, Persuasion and Weapons of Influence. And he came up with this idea. For a while it was 6, now it's up to 7. He added unity in the bottom. But he developed these concepts of persuasion that he found that humans, especially in the West, were really susceptible to. And if you notice the first one, authority. We tend to follow credible experts or people that we perceive are in positions of authority. What was the Milgram experiment, the position of authority? The person had a white lab coat on and a clipboard. There was not necessarily any title. There was no real hierarchy of power in that situation. It was just we perceived the people in the experiment perceived that person to be in a position of authority. Where else might we do that? We do it all the time. We do it at the doctor's office. We do it when we go get our car work done. We trust that the mechanic knows what they're talking about, right? They're in a position of authority because they know more about a car than we do in many cases. All right, so we do it all the time, right? We tend to trust people that we view as credible experts. You guys are sitting here looking at me, assuming I'm a credible expert in this particular topic, right? We do it at every conference that we go to, right? So it happens over and over again. Consistency is really interesting. We have a tendency to trust people who have done what they said they were going to do. We trust they'll do it again. Social proof's a powerful one. We'll talk a little bit more about that one. Obviously, we look at how others behave. When you guys came in, you sat in the chairs facing the same direction. A fun experiment to do in social proof, I like to do this a lot, is walk into an elevator and you walk straight to the back and don't turn around. You stand there like this. And if somebody else comes in and does it with you, you'll start to see other people in the elevator will turn around and face the same direction you are. It's very strange and odd, but it also makes people really uncomfortable when you don't do the thing they expect you to do. What do when we go in the elevator? We walk into the back wall, we turn around and we face the door. That's normal behavior. So if you do something outside of that, it really freaks people out. No one's sitting up front, right? So when you came in, there were people up front. There were a couple people that came into the back. They saw the open seats in the back. Those started to fill in. The people in the front left. Everybody else just kind of filled in where everybody else was, and now nobody's sitting in the front, which I don't blame you. I don't like sitting in the front either. But it's a bit of social proof. There's actually a really interesting experiment done by Solomon Asch, who was around the same time as Milgram, and in fact, I think they may have worked with each other at some point, where he did an experiment where he put 3 lines on the board, and he had 20 people in the room. Only one person was being tested, and he asked simple questions like, which of these lines is the longest? And every person that was an actor picked the line that wasn't the longest. When it got to the actor, what did they do? If everybody else picked the line that wasn't the longest, they also picked the line that wasn't the longest. Even afterwards, they said, well, I thought line C was the longest, but everybody else said B, so I thought, am I crazy? I just went with B. Social proof's a powerful thing. What's interesting is if one other of the paid actors chose the correct line, or any line that wasn't the line that everybody else chose, then the learner, the person being studied, was actually more likely to choose the correct line. Sometimes it only takes one dissenting opinion. Have you ever heard of the lone nut theory? Or seen the TED Talk of the lone nut? So there's this great video, it's called How to Start a Movement. And this guy he has a video of a guy dancing at some festivals by himself on the side of a hill, just having a great old time. He's probably on drugs, but he's dancing, he's having a good time at this festival. And everyone's kind of filming him and laughing at him and everything. Then one person joins him, starts dancing with him. Then a third, and a fourth, and then 20 people, and 30 people. So you're a lone nut until you gain your first follower. Sometimes all you need is that one follower, but then other people jump on the bandwagon. So again, social proof is a really interesting thing. Reciprocity is, basically we feel the need to give back to people who have given to us. Scarcity is a really fun one, especially one of Cialdini's pieces of advice is if you're selling a car, what do we tend to do if we're selling anything, a car or anything otherwise? We have a tendency to book people one at a time. He says, book them 5 minutes apart. So the first person comes in, they start kicking your tires, they're looking at every scratch in the car, they're trying to talk you down. And the second person shows up and the pressure's on. Now there's 2 buyers in one car. If a third buyer shows up, the first guy's either going to offer you exactly what you asked for it on the spot, or he's going to get frustrated and leave, and the second buyer's going to offer it to you because he realized there's one car for multiple buyers at that point, right? So scarcity increases the value of something. It's a really interesting psychological influence. This is a collection of things that I get in the mail. I donate to a couple causes, and so now I get donation requests for every cause on the planet, it seems like. So I was hoping, it's going to be hard to see for those of you in the back, but maybe you could pick some of Caldini's things here, right? Liking, scarcity, social proof, unity, things like that. Can you see any of those influences here? Absolutely. They're giving me lots of stuff. I use all of these, like St. Jude's, Alzheimer's. I have all these notebooks. So reciprocity, they're giving me a gift. Any other ones? Some of them are hard to see, but like this one says, yeah, yes, I'll be one of 3,000 new donors. A little bit of social proof. Yeah, some of them actually play on things like scarcity, like one of the only few. Proudly joining this campaign, so you got a little bit of authority. Like even the name, right? National Multiple Sclerosis Society. I can be part of an authoritative group. But there's a lot. I identified a lot, right? Reciprocity is a big one. Some of them that, the association piece, being associated with these organizations. Public opinion. It's an interesting one. Right? So there's lots of them in here. There's a third guy I wanted to mention. There's actually 2 guys. So Daniel Kahneman gets a lot of the credit, but he also worked with a guy named Amos Tversky. And he wrote this great book called Thinking Fast and Slow about the brain systems. And he simplifies it into system 1 and system 2. The brain is significantly more complex than just 2 systems. But what he does, what Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman did was they tried to break it down into simple terms. They said, listen, your brain really functions in 2 ways. The first is to make really rapid decisions. And the second, which takes a lot of energy, is really putting your thinking cap on and thinking rationally through problems. Here's the challenge. The brain is inherently lazy. It takes a lot of energy to think critically. And we all work in the knowledge economy. We're taxing our brains all the time. The work that you guys are doing is putting a lot of pressure on your brain. So your brain is trying to counteract that and let its guard down as much as possible. So that's something we have to be aware of. Now, it serves us really well. System 1 serves us really well. When you're in System 1 a lot is when you're driving somewhere that you're well familiar with. If you go to the gym a lot or you go to work, you drive to work and you drive home from there. You ever notice, I'm sure all of us have done it, you get in the car, next thing you know, you're home. You're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize. I just drove 30 minutes home, I didn't even realize it. That's because System 1 took over. It allowed you to kind of escape a little bit. You didn't have to think about all the things that you don't have to consciously think about putting your blinker on and putting your hands at 10 and 2 and turning the wheel and all that kind of stuff. Your brain just does it. Right? It gets into these patterns. Other times when you're driving in, let's say, New York City or Chicago for the first time, what do we tend to do? We tend to turn the radio down. We tend to put both hands on the wheel. We're paying very close attention. Our eyes are wide. You're in System 2 at that point. You're really thinking hard about, where do I have to turn? Oh God, I hope I don't run over a pedestrian. Right? If you're my wife, every bump and clink, she thinks she hit a kid. She's like, oh my God, did I hit somebody? I think I hit a kid. Like, there's midnight, there's no kids out. Right, so our brain is always trying to push us into System 1 as much as possible. And that's why we get that weird gut feeling. So we're going to test that now with a very complex game I like to call 5 words, 3 seconds. I'm going to show you 5 words for 3 seconds each, and you guys have to shout out what you think those 5 words have in common. All right, you ready? Here we go. Yeah. Any more specifically? Yeah, so most people know food or fast food. You didn't really have to think about it. You might have even only seen one of those words, right? You might have looked only at cheeseburger and hot dog and oh yeah, fast food, that's easy. All right, let's try another one. Any more specific than animals? Wild animals? Somebody say African animals? Yeah. So they're all African animals, right? So again, System 1, right? Patterns of recognition. You guys are getting this. We'll try one that's a little bit more complex, but we'll see if you get it. Of course, peppers. I tried to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Some people think Christmas. Red, green, bell, even ghost. that Christmas song, Scary Ghost Stories, Tales of the Glories or something like that. So I did try to throw. I did have one person yell Pac-Man on that one time, which I thought was very strange. And I had to really think about it. I was like, man, but sweet throws it off. There's no, I don't think there's anything sweet, unless you count the cherry, I suppose. All right, one last one. Acetylene's a mushroom? Oh, I'm going back too far, hang on. Anything? All right, so I did two things here. The first is I forced you guys into system one on multiple ones, things that I knew that you would recognize. That last one is just 5 random words that all start with one of the vowels, A, E, I, O, and U. But other than that, they don't have anything in common. But I don't know if you noticed, I also spread the words out with each one. So I made your eyes move around the screen a little bit. So now your brain is concentrating on eye movement and interpreting those words, and I'm putting time pressure on you. Right? I'm trying to force you into system 2. So that feeling that you got, maybe a little bit panicky, where you're like, uh-oh, I should know this one. You might have felt a little bit of stress. It's silly, but you might have felt that weird thing like, oh, how come I can't get this one? I also create a little bit of competition between everybody because you want to be the first one to recognize it and know that your brain is working. That's that feeling. That's that system 2 feeling, that bit of stress. Your brain is, you shouldn't be stressed out about that at all. But that little bit of stress is your brain trying to push you out of system 2 because it takes energy. It eats up calories. All right, we got one more thing. Oh yeah, well, this is just a comparison. I wanted to make sure you guys had kind of an idea of, I do this, I teach part-time, and I like to create tables for my students because a lot of times we talk about things like digital forensics and instant response, and I confuse them because we cover a lot in one section at a time, and a lot of them don't come from, a lot of them are finance students and business students. So I put everything in the tables, and so now I've got this habit where I like to tablicize things to make it nice and easy to interpret. So if you walk off with these slides, I wanted to make sure it was an easy way for you to think of system 1 and system 2. So there's a couple key insights here that, Milgram told us that we tend to obey authority figures. Cialdini says it's not just authority figures, there's all sorts of things that villains can take advantage of. There's these kind of human patterns, especially in the Western world, things that we fall victim to. And then Kahneman said, well, our brain wants us to make quick decisions. So our brain is more likely to trick us or lead us, if we're focused on intuition, our brain is more likely to lead us down straight paths if we don't stop and slow down and think about things more carefully from time to time. Well, there's one more thing I wanted to know, which is priming. Priming is a really interesting psychological phenomenon. There's tons and tons and tons of studies on it. But basically, and advertisers use it all the time, right? Certain colors make us think certain things. Certain smells make us act a certain way. Certain words we hear can influence our behaviors later in the day. So this is a really important thing, especially when we think about cybersecurity education, because what's the one thing that we tend, for years and years now, we've tended to tell our staff is not to click on anything in an email and not to open up attachments. But what do we do when we actually need to send them something? We have them, even like cybersecurity training, we have them click on a link and we have them open attachments. So we're training them out of doing the thing just to train them in those bad behaviors. So then we get mad at them when they do that, when it didn't come from us. Even CIS, recently, we sent out this email that, if I showed it to you guys, you'd be like, that's clearly a phishing email. But it came from our learning and development department. And it was like the skeeviest looking phishing email, and my entire team reported it as phishing. And then they had to make this announcement, like, no, that's a legitimate email. I'm like, you did exactly what we tell the entire community not to do. So we do this over and over and over again. So it's really important, though, that most of the time we're not aware of the priming that happens. There's these really interesting experiments where by putting certain smells into learners beforehand, we can influence the words that they choose on word choice exams. Instead of, like, by putting clean sense, if we give them blank blank P, they'll choose soap instead of soup, when 90% of the time people will say soup and not soap. But just giving them a clean smell beforehand, we can influence the word choice that they choose on these experiments. So it's not just the things that we say, the things that we hear, but it's the things that we feel, touch, smell. Right? It's crazy. And the best part about it is we're totally unaware of it. Right? So has big implications for how we shape behavior. All right, so putting this all in, we think about all these kind of interesting things that are going on from a psychological perspective. This is what we're up against, right? And there's so much more. I'm like kind of cherry picking things out of psychology. There's so many more interesting things that are going on. So why are we easily duped? Well, animals, over time have developed defense mechanisms that prepare them whether they're predators or prey, right? They've developed thick neck skin, or giant fangs, claws. They can swim really fast, right? There's apex predators and there's, prey animals that have developed the ability to see better at night. So we didn't get any of that. We don't have thick skin on our neck to make sure, we're protected from something that tries to bite us on the neck. We don't have prehensile tails and stuff like that. What we got was a big brain. And that's important because it made us, the alpha animal on the planet. But what's crazy about it is our brain is only 2% of our overall body mass, but it eats up 25%, upwards of 25% of our calories. That's why our brain's so lazy, right? It's in energy saving mode. And you can really think of the brain, this is debated, by psychologists and evolutionary psychologists and anthropologists and stuff, whether or not we have one brain, three brains, blah, 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 blah. But you can really think about a lot of the decisions happening in our brains as happening in three different parts of our brain, either in the brainstem and the cerebellum, the limbic system, which is our emotional responses to things, or in our neocortex, when we're actually thinking critically and possessing foresight, looking out in the future and trying to make predictions. We're using our human brain. When you put your hand on the stove and it's really hot and you yank it off really quickly, that's not happening in your neocortex. It's actually happening in your spine. That nervous reflex doesn't even travel to your brain. You don't sit there with your hand on a hot stove and go, gee, that's really hot. I better think about this. I should probably take my hand off of it quickly or I'm going to have permanent damage to my palm, right? As soon as you touch it, you're like, oh, and then afterwards you're like, Christ, that's hot. Oh my God, I didn't realize how hot that was, right? It happens before you even realize that it's happened. And that same thing can be applied in other contexts, right? When we think about it. So basically it boils down to we live with, these kind of industrial-like policies, right? Almost this classroom setting, everybody facing the person at the front of the room, with godlike technology, but we still have these caveman brains. And that's the problem. So what that ends up leading to is we have all these cognitive biases, which are the way the brain thinks, that lead us astray, and we also have logical fallacies, which are flaws in our logic. One of my favorite quotes of all time is attributed to Fisher Ames. I'm not 100% sure that he said it. He said, men are not to be reasoned out of position that they have not reasoned themselves into, or an opinion that they have not reasoned themselves into. It's one of my favorite comedians, Todd Glass, says you can't reason somebody out of something they didn't reason themselves into. So really thinking about that, there's challenges that we're up against, right? Our brains have a hard time sifting through massive amounts of data. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves from a time perspective, especially in America. We have to do everything so fast, and that puts a lot of pressure on us. And that makes us very susceptible. If you're interested in learning more about cognitive biases, impossible to read from here. I get that. I just wanted to show you visually how many there are. There's a lot. And again, these are like issues with the way that the brain is wired, right? These are not things that we can necessarily fix. But I like to think of them as organized in these four sections. And you can see most of them are in need to act fast or too much information. So think about that from a society perspective. What kind of society do we live in? We live in one that's processing crazy amounts of information and with this incessant need to make quick decisions. The average person today is exposed to more than 75 gigabytes of data per day, which is insane. That's the amount of data that a well-educated person around the founding of this country would have experienced in their entire lifetime. We're seeing that on a daily basis. It's a massive amount of data. So of course our brains are overstimulated and we're overwired and we're stressed and we make poor decisions. And threat actors can take advantage of that. Logical fallacies, on the other hand, are things that we can actually train ourselves out of. It's the way that we rationalize data. And we see a lot of them in cybersecurity. One of my favorites is the Texas sharpshooter. The idea behind it is, out in like spaghetti western, you got a guy who's shooting up the side of a bar, and bullet holes all over the place, and he goes up and finds where the cluster is, and then he paints the bullseye around that cluster and goes, see how good I am? We do that all the time in data analysis. We find clusters not because they're meaningful clusters. We find clusters because we're looking at it and go, well, here's a cluster of data. It must be meaningful. Let's paint a bullseye around that. Another one that I see a lot in I mean, obviously, bandwagon effect is a big one, but one that I see a lot in cybersecurity is the gambler's fallacy. So the gambler's fallacy is, if you think about it, if you have the coin flip, and you're betting on whether or not it's going to be heads or tails, you go, well, we've had 4 heads in a row, it's bound to be tails. Not accounting for the fact that every coin flip is a 50-50% chance of being heads or tails. So we can't go with this, well, this hasn't happened, so it's bound to happen. Or this happened too many times, we're bound to be safe. I see that a lot in local governments where people have this idea like, well, we're too small. We're too small to be attacked. Right? No, you can't think that way, right? That's fallen into the gambler's fallacy. So where I tend to see biases in cybersecurity fall into this space, one that you're probably well aware of is anchoring. We have a tendency to anchor on to the first piece of data, but it's not always the first piece. It can often just one piece of data, and then we can't let it go. We don't readjust our opinions and our hypotheses as new data comes to the table. So it's important that we recognize when we do that we do that, and then when we do that. But one that people, I think, don't necessarily think about is base rate neglect. And I hear this a lot, particularly with in cybersecurity leadership positions where people came into a leadership position, either IT or cybersecurity, but they didn't come up through through the ranks. They came in from some other position. They have a tendency to think something is really, really bad when it's actually something that occurs all the time. So one of the best examples I can give you is denial of service attacks, right? How often do DDoS attacks occur globally? I mean, they're all day, every day for some organizations. It's constant, right? Not every DDoS attack is a mask for some nefarious, Chinese deep state major espionage campaign. But I work with a guy who thinks that. Every time he hears about a DDoS, he's like, it's got to be, the Chinese are covering something up. He ignores the fact that DDoS happens all the time, and Chinese espionage is, well, really, low and slow. Corporate espionage attacks are difficult, right? They're hard to come off. They're hard to execute, and that persistence is hard to maintain. So another way to think about base rate neglect is, if you know anybody who, I'll give you a really good example. I have a friend of mine who has a tick. He has his head ticks all the time. And people that have meet him for the first time, especially if they meet him through me, they ask me if he has Tourette syndrome because he has a tick. Not realizing that ticks are extremely common and Tourette syndrome is extremely rare. Why do we jump to, this person has a tick, a nervous tick, he must have Tourette syndrome? Because that's what's been, kind of publicized from the media. There's shows on HBO and stuff about people who have Tourette syndrome. There's, popular social media accounts where it's interesting to watch people who actually suffer from this condition. But it's extremely rare. So that's base rate neglect, ignoring the commonality of one event and supposing it's something that it isn't. The other one we see a lot is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I'm sure many of you have heard of that before. It's pretty familiar. But people who are not very good at something tend to overestimate their abilities. If you want an interesting video of it, it's a really funny YouTube video. I think it's called the Church Singer or something like that, where this guy goes on about how great he is, how many competitions he's won, and then he starts singing this song, and it's like nails on a chalkboard, right? He's very clearly has inflated sense of self and capability. We see this a lot, but I often see it in reverse. So the Dunning-Kruger effect goes both ways. People of low ability tend to overestimate their abilities, but people of extremely high ability tend to underestimate how good they are. And I see that more in cybersecurity and in IT than anywhere else. And it's part of it, I think, is kind of what the community's become, where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't so in-your-face sales pitchy and stuff like that. And the industry also wasn't moving quite as rapidly. It was easier to get your hands around stuff. But today, it's like you feel like if you step away for a weekend, you feel like you're behind, right? Because technology is turning over so rapidly. But there are some people, the last two guys that spoke, they were getting deep into SSRF. And they're probably amazing at web security in general, but I bet if you ask them questions around like OWASP vulnerabilities outside of SSRF, they'd probably be like, I'm not really, but I bet you they could run circles around most people here when it comes to web vulnerabilities, right? We have a tendency that people who are really, really good have a tendency to underestimate our abilities, so we see that a lot. Heuristics are ways that we get around some of this stuff. Our brain makes up these patterns. We do a time check too. How am I doing? I got 10 minutes or so. Okay. All right, so from a heuristics perspective, our brain tends, again, back to system 1, system 2, we tend to come up with these mental models to help us think through some of these things, right? So it's important for us to recognize when we're making decisions because it's a thing that we've always done, or we're informed by an emotional response, we're informed by our education. And instead of stopping, slowing down, and thinking rationally about things, right? Heuristics is all it is a mental framework or a mental model for how you make decisions. Okay, and it's useful from a day-to-day perspective. It's useful when you're driving to and from the gas station, or you're chopping through your email, and there's it's not a high-stakes situation. But when there is something that's high stakes, we have a tendency to fall into these heuristical models that can actually damage our ability to think critically about things. So let's take a quick heuristics quiz. A grill and tongs cost $110 in total. The grill costs $100 more than the tongs. How much do the tongs cost? Shout it out. Who's got it? Was it? Oh, we got some math whizzes in here. It is 5. Most people say 10, but it's $5. 5 and 105, exactly $100 more than 5 is 110. Tried to trick you. We tend to do math in tens and 100s, right, and not in 5s. So you see 10 and 110, you go, obviously it's $10. But 10 and 110 would be $120. An evil genius makes 8 machines that take 8 minutes to make 8 traps. How long would it take 64 of the same machines to make 64 traps? It's like this is not a fair crowd. You guys are too mathematical. It's 8 minutes, right? It takes 8 minutes. Again, tried to trick you with the 8 and 64. All right, one last one. Number of scary clowns in a magic clown car doubles every day. If it takes 30 days to fill the car to clown capacity, how long would it take to be halfway full? 29 days. Everyone get that? It's a tricky one. Most people just divide that in half and go, well, 15 days. This one is interesting because compound math, right? We have a tendency not to deal well with how, when you think about how things compound, exponentially increase and how things compound. So think about compound interest and how confusing that can be for most people who aren't mathematical geniuses, like our friend here in the front row. Most people fall into that mental model, like, well, it's half, so it'd be 15, half 30 is 15. All right, what causes more deaths in the U.S.? Medical errors or car accidents? Don't be shy. No wrong answers. What's that? Medical errors. It is medical errors. What's interesting is our brain tends to think car accidents because we're in the car more often. You see car accidents. You hear about car accidents. How often do you hear about medical errors killing people? Not very often. They cover a lot of that stuff up. Right? But if you think about it from an insurance perspective, right, medical errors really are, it's a massive problem. Look at the rates here, right? Third leading cause of death in the U.S. It's crazy compared to car accidents. 250,000 per year compared to 40,000 per year. That's nuts. Even knowing that, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. All right, adults are more likely to sleep with a comfort item like a stuffy or a blankie, or wash their hands after going to the bathroom. Yeah, sadly, right? Look at the rates there. 34% for a comfort item versus 20% for hand washing. So carry hand sanitizer with you at all times and apply it after shaking hands. And supermarket option, which leads to more purchases? 24 flavors of jam or 6 flavors of jam? So what's interesting about this, they actually did a number of studies on this, and they found more options, again, causes people to panic. It causes stress. I always think about, like, when we went from, so I grew up in the 80s, maybe we had like 12 channels or something like that. In the 90s, it was like 101 channels. And then when I was in the military, and I got a Dish Network, I think, and it was like 500 channels, and I could never find anything to watch, and I would just be like, I'm just going to turn this thing off. And I canceled it after like 6 months because I was like, there's 500 channels, and it's like overwhelming. I don't know what to watch. So this is just a quick one, right? I love SANS. I'm not pooping on SANS here. I love SANS. But when we look at this is the kind of stuff we give to our folks and say, hey, don't fish. Here's all the things or don't get fish. Here's all the things that you need to be aware of. But who's going to read that? And who's going to interpret it? Right? We're teaching them what not to do and not how to think about what to look for, how to challenge your own beliefs. So if I can set you up with a couple things to go, it's really this. Slow down. When the rest of the world is telling you to speed up, you got to slow down. Think about the choices that we're making. Force our brain into system 2 as much as possible. If you get that tingly, spidey sense that something isn't right, chances are it's not right. So don't make a rash decision. My wife tells me this all the time. I have a tendency to buy every salesperson that tries to sell me something. I'm like, oh yeah, sounds great. Even though I know, I do that. My wife is the rational one as far as that goes. She's always telling me, don't buy into it. Don't buy into the charm. But I get got all the time as far as salespeople go, especially if it's music instruments. I can't help myself. Metacognition is a term you may have heard of before. It's basically thinking about thinking. I challenge everybody here to go back to a belief that you've held for a long time. It doesn't have to be a religious belief or a spiritual belief, just something that you believed for a long time. It could be, I don't know, JFK conspiracy or, or Princess Diana or something like that. But think about, your thoughts about something that you believe and really question, like, why do you believe that? What evidence do you have? What would change your mind? Spend time thinking about your process of thinking and talk it out with somebody. Especially when you work from a cybersecurity perspective. If you're approached with a difficult problem, talk it out with somebody. We do this in intelligence all the time. The cyber threat intelligence model is very open. You get all of your thinking, all of your thought processes, structured analytic techniques. It's all laid out on the table so other analysts can see what you're talking about and challenge your beliefs. That's how you end up with the best possible decision and the best possible outcome and the best possible product. So think that through. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody about what you're thinking and have those thought processes challenged. It can be uncomfortable. It will be uncomfortable, but it's okay. You'll live, right? It's not life or death. Ending with a Carl Sagan quote, because I love Carl Sagan. For me, it's far better to grasp the universe as it really is than to persist in delusion, however satisfying and reassuring. I do have one other interactive thing. I think we have enough time for it. It's a memory test. Brings us back to Peter Vishnu in the beginning. It's up to you if you guys would like to do it. It's interactive. Test your memory. Yeah? Want to try it? All right. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a table of terms, and I want you're going to look at it for 30 seconds, try to memorize every word that you can, and then we're going to do a recall test, and there's a reason for it. It's going to bring us back to the heuristics. I'm going to talk about why you remember certain things, okay? So 30 seconds. Don't take a picture of it. No cheating. All right. So now you have 60 seconds to recall. You can write them down, type, anything you can remember. You got 60 seconds. Write down every word you remember. No cheating. I'm watching you. There's a reason why you'll remember some words and you won't remember others. You got about 20 more seconds. Less than 10 seconds. Still see some people writing. All right. How many got sleep? All right, awesome. That's called the primacy effect. So sleep was the top left item in the table. It was probably the first word that you read, and you probably read it multiple times. When you see a table, and especially in the West, if you grew up in the Western society, you read right to left, or sorry, left to right. And when you see a table, you tend to, again, read left to right. So you read the top left one, and you go to the right, then you go down a row and go across. Even if you're a person who reads by column, you still will start in that top left column. So sleep was the top left column. That's the primacy effect. How many got pillow? Great. That's called the recency effect. So it's the opposite of the primacy effect. That was the bottom right one. Just like you tend to start in the top left, you tend to end in the bottom right. And so again, you probably read sleep more than every other one, and you probably read pillow more than every other one. Those are two cognitive bias effects that will happen because you read those two words over and over, and those are the two that you're most likely to remember. But you probably didn't get this one. Well, let's see if anybody did. How many of you got bed? Got several. Well, this is what's interesting. Bed's not in the list. So that's called reconstructive reference. I gave you a bunch of words around the word bed, including sleep, pillow, blanket, snore, things like that. And you can do this with any of. You want to recreate this, you can do it with bed, chair. Pick a word and build that scenario. This is one of the reasons why eyewitness testimony is so problematic, right? Because the scenario around which the context around which something happens can effectively implant an idea in your brain back to priming that didn't actually occur, okay? So can't trust your own memory, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much. I'll be around today and tomorrow. Come find me.